All right, we're going to close out today with just a little short presentation, and we can go back to working on our components before everyone has to head out. But what I wanted to do a little short presentation on was sort of how to keep up with what's going on in this space. Things change very quickly, as I've sort of tried to allude to throughout my presentations, that a lot of these things have changed, as recently as a couple weeks ago. Decisions have been made, technologies change, new APIs come up, APIs are deprecated. So things are constantly in churn, and that can be challenging. It can be challenging to keep up with what's going on. You can't just read a book and expect to kind of know the state of what web components will be, a year from now, because it will definitely be changing. So I want to go through a couple of resources that I follow that are helpful for me, and it might be helpful if you want to keep up with what's going on. So the first, for web components in particular, is this nice little newsletter called Web Components Weekly. And I'll be showing 3 different newsletters, but this one in particular I find really useful for web components. It was started really recently. Go to webcomponentsweekly.me is the URL. You can also Google Web Components Weekly. And this is a mailing list that you get an email to every week, and your emails look something like this, where you just get, they compile articles on different things that are happening in the web component space. So you can get information, a lot of times they're news, blog posts, podcasts, links, resources, events for things that are going on. And this one was started fairly recently, but you can come see, you can get this into your inbox every week, or you can just visit the website and they list all the issues online. So Web Components Weekly is pretty useful. The next one is JavaScript Weekly, another weekly newsletter. Again, they list all their issues online, but you can subscribe to it via email. It's all free newsletters. JavaScript Weekly is great. I actually get really excited every week when it arrives in my inbox. It usually comes on Friday. And this looks something like this. Let's go to latest issue, where you get some headlining articles. There's been some talk about WebAssembly recently. So there's some links to that in this most recent issue, June 19th. They have links to the articles, they have some job postings, and then they have sort of these links to non-featured articles, but smaller ones, so news articles, tutorials, blog posts, opinion blog posts, tools, code, all sorts of things. JavaScript Weekly is probably one of the more popular ones. I find it very useful if you can't kind of follow up with the latest and greatest and don't want to be checking every day for various blogs. JavaScript Weekly is a good sum of the week of kind of what are people talking about, what is going on in the space. And the next one is HTML5 Weekly, another one of these once a week newsletters. So JavaScript Weekly is javascriptweekly.com. HTML5weekly.com is HTML5 Weekly. And this is more for HTML and web platform news. So JavaScript is JavaScript specific, web components is web component specific. This is HTML specific, so things like CSS, WebSockets, native client, WebGL, technologies like that. And so this article, this newsletter looks a little bit like this, very similar to JavaScript Weekly, where you get different blog posts, you get different news, tutorials, tools, videos, that sort of thing. And you can kind of skim it and see what's going on, and click on what seems interesting and read up on it.
What was the first of the 3?
The first of 3 is Web Components Weekly. And so that's webcomponentsweekly.me is the URL. And these will be news that's specific to a web components column or XTags, etc., etc. So those are 3 weekly newsletters. I think that's great if you're not following it constantly, following what's going on constantly. You can kind of look at a curated list every week. They're pretty solid lists, especially JavaScript Weekly, and they really help you kind of see what's going on, what people are talking about, where things are going. You get a sense of how things are changing. The next kind of main set of resources, well, for web components, there's this website, webcomponents.org. If you haven't visited it already, this is where we get the polyfill. We've already talked about that. This also is a great website for curated articles on web components. So this is maintained by the Web Components community. And up at the top here, we have articles. There's a whole bunch of articles that get posted here, and they're kept pretty up to date. This one's from June 18th, June 10th, June 8th. So pretty up to date and highlighted for Web Component specific articles. There are a whole bunch of presentations here that are helpful to see, so you can click on presentations and just get presentations. They have videos there and slides there. A few of mine are there if you're interested. Then you can go to podcasts as well, and they have links to podcasts specifically about web components. And then more of a generic resources page, which has links to examples, to boilerplate code, to generators if you're using a generator tool like Yeoman, and some other tools there. And so webcomponents.org is an excellent place to go. The next resource that I find really useful for web-related things is called the Web Platform Podcast. And so this is a podcast that you can listen to or watch, and they have it every week. These aren't web component specific, they're web platform, so HTML, JavaScript related. These are interesting. They're short podcasts. You can kind of listen to them if you prefer to hear about things via podcast. They're usually interviews with developers who have written libraries or work at big companies or can talk about different technologies. A lot of times they have the format as a panel, so you can kind of hear different perspectives on topics. They're also on Twitter here, so you can go to twitter.com/webplatform. They have a URL as well, and you can subscribe on iTunes, and the link's here. So while I'm on Twitter here, the rest of the resources are Twitter. The first is the Twitter account of our next speaker, next week's instructor, Zeno. Really great resource for web components. He's obviously going to be here next week talking about Polymer, so get excited for that. I think you should all follow him now if you're on Twitter. He'll get like a whole bunch of followers, and then he'll meet you all next week. Then two more accounts that I think, if you're on Twitter, you should definitely follow for web components. One is Eric Beitelman, engineer at Google, works on Chrome, Polymer, web components. I've quoted him quite a bit throughout the training this week. And you can see actually his latest tweet is on web components. How to create a composable nav-less web component. So yeah, he'll tweet things that are interesting like that, and things about CSS, different APIs. Twitter is a great resource for following what's going on, but of course you need to be a little bit more, you need to follow it a little more closely, because it's more of a day-to-day thing as opposed to a weekly thing. And then the last Twitter I'm going to suggest, and there are a lot to follow, but Rob Dodson's Twitter, again, developer advocate at Google. You can see he says, I love web components and Polymer, so that's definitely his main focus, and some really good tweets about Polymer, about web components in particular. And you can follow that to hear what's going on in the web component space. So those are the resources that I wanted to suggest. As you start to follow some of these, whether they're via Twitter or via email list, you'll start to see other resources that are related. You'll find things that you're interested in and start to follow those, and you start to build up a pretty big list. And that's how you can kind of keep in touch with what's going on. You'll find blogs that you find interesting, and maybe other podcasts, things like that. It's a very evolving space. Things change very quickly, and it's just important to kind of keep up if this is something you're interested in, if this is something you're interested in being on the cutting edge. Cutting edge moves very quickly. So that really means kind of keeping up with what's going on in the space. So yeah, I suggest definitely subscribing to the email if you're interested, picking up Twitter, and going from there.